Hello, and welcome back to the Be More Connected Summit. I'm your host, Elise Preston, founder of Be More Connected, and today I'm so excited and so honored to be here with the wonderful Dianne Bondy. Hi, Dianne.
Hi, Elise. How are you?
Doing pretty well. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well.
And Dianne is the author of Yoga for Everyone. She is a frequent contributor to Yoga International, DoYouYoga, Yoga Girl, and Omstars, and she's been featured in numerous publications from The Guardian to Huffington Post, Cosmo, and People. And Dianne's work is so unique and so powerful in the way that she's so deeply committed to increasing diversity in yoga. And I'm super, super excited to dive more into her work in our conversation today.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yes. And so I love to start off by asking our guests about their journey of healing and what's gotten them to where they are today.
It's a work in progress, right? Like we're always working towards healing, in my opinion. You think you've worked through something, and then you'll be walking along and you'll get this random trigger, and then all this stuff will come flooding to the forefront. You'll be like, I thought I did the deep work I need to do around that, but there's some things that probably get left. And I mean, for me, left behind, I should say. For me, yoga has been my path to my deep spiritual healing. One of the things that I've learned from yoga is how to be myself, how to be my authentic self, and that I'm entitled to have the feelings that I have, and that it's okay to work through those feelings and to figure out how I can overcome them, or I can learn from them, or they can be a tool to help serve others. It's been a really interesting journey getting to know yourself through this practice. I don't think if I had the yoga practice that I would have, uncovered the skills that I have, the wisdom that I have to offer, and the fact that I'm okay as I am, right? Like that I don't have anything to prove to anybody. And that was a big part of my yoga journey.
That's so powerful. And I love how you said that acknowledging and owning your feelings can actually be a way that you can serve others.
Yes.
And I'd love if you could share a little bit more about how that's shown up for you in your work.
What's really interesting to me, when I get triggered, that's when I'm most interested in owning these feelings. Anytime I get triggered, I always pause and go, oh, you just got angry. Why are you angry? Is this something worth getting angry over? And if it is, how are we going to channel that anger to do something good with it? Because I don't necessarily think anger is a bad emotion. I think it's an emotion like anything else, like happiness or sadness. And how we choose to channel that anger can be really resourceful and helpful. And for me, it's an excellent motivator.
Oh, yes. And I think that's so important to acknowledge. Like, how do we actually pause and go through that process of analyzing our emotions a little bit? What are they indicating? What are they telling us? How can we use them in a positive way and do something productive versus something that could potentially be destructive, depending on how we use that?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so I shared a little bit of your more formal introduction, but I would love if you could share with our audience about what's really alive for you in your work right now.
It's right now, seeing as we're in self-isolation and safe at home, I've been really working on producing really great video content. So this has been a really interesting journey for me because I started yoga when I was 3 years old with my mom.
Wow.
And so I've been practicing for a really long time, and my practice has evolved, right? Like when I was in college, I didn't practice as much. I got into whatever was going on in college, like, step aerobics or boot camp or whatever the physical modalities that come up. And I've drifted in and out of those physical modalities, but I've always stuck with my yoga. And when I opened my yoga studio in 2015, my son was, or 2005, I should say. My son was brand new. I think he was maybe 3 months old. And I decided to become an entrepreneur and have my own business. And then shortly after that, when he turned around 5 or so, my friends started having babies and were saying things like, well, actually not even. At the six month mark, my friends were saying, we can't get out to yoga anymore because they were having babies. And so then we decided to put the content of the yoga studio online. So around 2012, we started what was then Yoga Stea. So we started shifting to an online platform 8 years ago. And initially people kind of, was like, oh, you're doing yoga online. Oh, it's ruining the teachings, blah, blah, blah. And I'm so grateful that I didn't listen to that. And I trusted my instinct that the best way to get to as many people as possible is to make the yoga as accessible as possible. So perhaps you can't afford a membership at a studio that would run anywhere from $65 to $150, depending on where you are, what part of the country you live in, what the studio's like. Perhaps you could afford like $9 to have a month membership full of all these classes. And this is what we did back in 2012. And everybody was just like, oh, you're going to kill the yoga studio model and you're going to do this and you're going to do that. None of those things happened. And now that we're in this really tenuous situation, I can't tell you how many people have reached out to me and said, how do I get my business online?
Right. You were on the cutting edge of this.
and it was like, it's the same people who were like looking down their nose at me going, I can't believe you're taking your business online. So I just thought, I've just been really fortunate. The universe has put me in a position where I can kind of be at the forefront of stuff. So that's just been really interesting to me. So that was one of my big aha moments in my business. I owned a yoga studio for 10 years and I sold it in 2014, 2015, when I started traveling and speaking. So that's how I kind of started. I was a local yoga teacher. I owned a local studio. I really made sure that I had my studio in a place where it was accessible. It was on a bus line. It was in a lower income neighborhood. I really worked at having diverse teachers, sliding scale pricing, all of the things that are, I think, a little bit more mainstream now. I was doing when my yoga studio was opening because I wanted everybody to be able to come. And so that's kind of how I started. And then people started asking me to speak on that. And when I started getting opportunities to travel and speak, then I sold the studio and it kind of evolved from there. I've always been a teacher who's been interested in inclusivity and accessibility, making sure that people could feel comfortable walking through the front doors of the studio, not like they didn't belong, seeing themselves represented within the population of the studio, making sure that my teachers and myself were trained enough to be able to diversify the practice. If people weren't going to be able to do the practice in a way that we see it traditionally being taught, how do I create accessible variations and modifications so people can come to the practice and feel like I can also do this. This is also for me, which led to me writing the book Yoga for Everyone and my new book coming out with my friend Kat Hegberg from Yoga International called Yoga Where You Are. So it's really taking me down this, this path. I had no idea this was what I was going to do with my life. So it's been pretty amazing.
Yes. And it sounds like you really had an ability to tap into and trust your intuition throughout that entire process. And I'd love if you could share a bit more about how that did evolve for you, because I'm sure that it wasn't easy, especially in the yoga world that often doesn't prioritize inclusivity, accessibility, creating spaces where all people feel welcome in their practice.
This is new. This whole inclusivity and accessibility is super new in the past 5 years as a mainstream idea. Right. So when I came to the yoga practice, it was very much a very physical practice, a very athletic practice, a very postural practice. And this is before Instagram, right? This is all before people were putting up very curated pictures of themselves doing some impossible acrobatic feats. This was before all of that, before like the launch of Facebook and all that, the yoga, the rise of the yoga celebrity, if you will. And what was really interesting to me is that's not how I learned yoga. I learned yoga with my mom from a book, and we just played with the poses because she was at home with, you know, 3 small kids under the age of 4. She didn't drive. We lived in a rural space. And she just was like, I need to get a little exercise. And so she had this book that she had brought with her when she emigrated. She emigrated from Barbados to England, London, England, and then, well, Liverpool, England, and then from Liverpool to Canada. And so she, and this was back in the 60s and 70s. And so she needed this as an outlet for her to distress being at home with 3 small children. And so that was my basic introduction. So it was always just about whatever we could do. It was never about a fancy yoga mat or expensive yoga clothing or taking pictures of yourself doing incredible acrobatic feats. It was like never about that, right? And so that is my genesis into the practice. And then when it became this mainstream multi-billion-dollar industry, and then we see it shift from being about getting to know yourself and about connection and about lifting the spirits of and finding your inner radiance and connecting people and helping people and serving people, to who can look the best, who can go the fastest, who can be the brightest, who can be the biggest yoga celebrity. And that's where, for me, it kind of lost its meaning for a little bit. And I thought to myself, I really want to focus on all the people that I don't see in yoga studios. When I go into a studio and I look around, I never saw myself represented. And that's why I decided I would open a studio, because I wanted to see people like me teaching. I wanted to see people like me practicing, and I just wasn't seeing that in the spaces that I was visiting. And I thought to myself, well, if it's not here, and then that must mean that I have to create it. So that's what happened. I thought to myself, if I ever have an opportunity to have a space that I would, you know, really represent everybody, you know. Yeah, I remember my yoga mentor, Bill Thomas, saying, how about yoga for everyone else? Like, you know, we've seen all of this other yoga right now.
Sure.
How about yoga for just like regular people? And I thought, absolutely, because that was not being represented. And every other yoga studio you went to was, you know, power yoga. We were in a real power yoga flow part here in Windsor, where everything was like very postural, very exercise based, very hot, very fast.
Yeah.
And it was time, you know, what happens to those people who can't do that kind of practice? Do they not belong? Do they not get to show up to yoga class? And so I really wanted to offer something that was different.
Yes, and I definitely have had similar experiences of really seeking spaces in the yoga world, in the wellness world, where I feel that there are other people around me that are sharing a similar experience, but also where I just feel included in the space. And so I so appreciate all of the work that you're doing, particularly in prioritizing and presencing inclusive teachers, inclusive spaces, because it's so needed. And there is such a huge gap and a huge disparity in terms of just the available outlets and the resources for women of color, people of varying different shapes and sizes and abilities. And it is becoming a little more mainstream now, but it's still
new. This is new. I would say it's new in the past 5 years. I remember back in 2012 or 2014, being in self-quarantine for so long, everything just kind of like
all time is just,
it's just like, I can't remember 10 years ago, something I think happened last year, happened 5 years ago, you know, it's just so strange. But I remember when I met Melanie Klein of the Yoga and Body Image Coalition, and we met over Twitter of all places, that I was posting all of this stuff about inclusive yoga. And I had written an article or a blog for Elephant Journal saying that yoga wasn't just for skinny white girls. And the title was definitely clickbait, because I'm going to tell you, I had everybody, including skinny white girls, coming for me. But I also had a lot of people going, finally, somebody is saying this out loud, that you step into a yoga space and whoever's working the front desk is judging you based on your body size or whatever clothes you show up in. Going into yoga spaces and having people move their mats, or having, yoga teachers coming up to me and assuming because I'm in a plus size or non-conforming body, that I don't do yoga, or because I'm Black, I must not practice yoga because Black people don't practice yoga. And having all those predominant ideas hit me at the door of the yoga studio. And to go to all these trainings to become more proficient in sharing yoga, and have all the teachers that are teaching you be that, for lack of a better term, yoga Barbie, size 0, size 2, young, hypermobile, doing all these really inaccessible poses, and then talking about the light and the breath like this is what it's all about, when it's really not. And so that was a big journey for me to decide, how do I want to show up in the yoga space, and how do I want to make sure that this feeling of marginalization that I felt on the mat doesn't happen to anybody else, and how do I create that space and hopefully teach others to do the same. So it's been a long journey. That article for Elephant Journal went viral. I go back and look at it every now and again. And I wrote that in 2011. So things have come a long way since then, right? Like I now, when I scroll through Instagram wasn't a thing in 2011, but when I scroll through Instagram now, I'm seeing women that look like me, right? There's, Black Girls Rock Yoga and Black Girl Yoga. And there's all these people and all these different kinds of bodies doing yoga now, which was just not the case as little as 5 years ago. It wasn't the case. The yoga aesthetic was very much connected to the traditional beauty aesthetic. A lot of people looking like models in very, revealing clothing, doing all kinds of provocative kinds of things on the yoga mat. And we weren't seeing just regular people showing up and experiencing their practice in a way that looked inclusive and accessible. And I wasn't here for it. So it was my disruptor spirit. And that kind of got amplified when I joined the Yoga and Body Image Coalition with Melanie and a group of us who were doing this work and saying, this can't stand. We have to be stewards of the message as well. We are also yoga practitioners. We also deserve to be in the space. And to be clear, I'm not saying that those bodies don't deserve to be in the space. They certainly do, but they are overrepresented in the space. So
highly overrepresented.
Highly overrepresented. So let's open up the space for other voices to be included and other bodies to be included. So that was my journey.
Yes. And I think that is so inspirational and so important to really presence the idea that, okay, I'm moving through a space that doesn't feel like it includes me. And how can I then connect with others and work to build the kinds of communities and relationships where this is a priority and all bodies, all people are reflected and included. And I would love if you could share a little bit more about the coalition that you mentioned and the work that you're doing there.
The Yoga and Body Image Coalition started in 2012 and has published a series of books, starting with the book back in 2014. It's on my desk behind me, but it's 25 stories of people who have felt marginalized by this, of beauty, bravery, and resilience, who have had a similar experience of being marginalized within the yoga practice, underrepresented, underestimated within the yoga practice, not seen within the yoga practice, and how that made them feel in the moment and what they did to overcome that. And, what was really interesting and what I learned about being a part of this coalition is it was really wonderful to have a series of voices come together and speak to the lived experience of those of us at the margins. So not only are we talking about people of color, people with different disabilities, or people in disabled bodies, we were also talking about people who were older, people of different ethnicities, people of different religions, people who are part of the LGBTQIA+ community. So all of these people who are often pushed to the margins of society. We're also being pushed to the margins of the yoga mat, if you will. And it was really interesting to me because it showed me that yoga in this capitalist commercial sense is really just a microcosm of what goes on in the world. It really just represents that. Why is it the most popular and famous yoga teachers in the world are all young white women? Why is it the yoga industry, the only people who are actually making money are people selling really expensive leisure wear or athletic wear? Like, why aren't individual teachers who are serving communities and making the world a better place aren't allowed to be financially secure? Why is it if you have a teacher of color, a teacher with a disability, an older teacher at the front of the room, a teacher from the LGBTQIA community, why is it they're already decidedly less valuable than the traditional yoga teacher we've seen in the past? Why aren't South Asian voices lifted to the center? Because this is their culture that they've shared with us, and we've appropriated, changed, commercialized, commodified, wrapped in a bow, and resold to everybody else at a huge margin. Like, why are all these things happening? And it's because that's what happens in the world. And if we don't speak of it, and if we don't push back against it, and if we don't reclaim the narrative of it, then it gets taken from us, and then it becomes about something entirely different, and that's not what we want.
Right. I think that is so important to really name and acknowledge that this experience that we're having in the yoga world is a microcosm. It's just a reflection of all of the other systems that we're living within. And I so appreciate you asking all of those questions that you just shared, interrogating and really giving us the opportunity to analyze, like, what's going on here and how can we work to shift and change that.
And that's what the coalition is about. And really, a lot of the work that we have done is highlighting those voices. And the beauty of a coalition is that many voices come to the platform, as opposed to one voice speaking for all of us, which is often what happens. And that voice is never representative of the people at the margins. It's always representative at the people at the middle. So we really wanted to make sure that those voices were elevated, that we could elevate each other's work, that our voices could be combined to become stronger, that we could put out forward-facing imagery within media platforms that represent what we actually saw. And that, transitioned its way into me creating teacher trainings called Yoga for All, which we're currently running a session, or about to run a session now, where I could start to educate teachers about critical thinking when we're looking at yoga, our own personal biases when we look at each other. When you see a person of size come into class, what is your first thought that tramples through your brain? And why is that thought less than truthful or optimal? Where does that thought come from? What am I doing in my Svadhyaya, in my self-study, to unpack that belief system that has been taught to me for time immemorial? How do we start looking at those belief systems in the bigger scale and continuing to disrupt those belief systems, right? Yes. And so that's what, the Yoga and Body Image Coalition had started out and continues to do, is to really ask people to think critically. Why do we have this bias? Who is served by this bias? Who are in communities that are lacking access to resources? Why is that happening? And as a spiritual being who claims to see the light in everyone, why are we not seeing the light in those communities?
Amazing. Such important work. Like, I'm just taking a minute to take in everything that you just shared. And I think that it is really important too, to talk a little bit about that self-study piece that you mentioned. And I think that right now we're all at home. We are
at home
going through, some different waves and roller coasters of emotions. This is a very uncertain time.
Yes.
And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about how our yoga practice can support us and how we might be able to really kind of like leverage some of the tools and practices of yoga as we're in this very internal time.
Well, this is a really great opportunity for serious self-reflection, right? Because there's only so much cleaning, organizing, and laying around one could do if they are not working. If you're fortunate enough to be working from home, and here's the other thing, if you're a fortunate enough person to be safe at home without any other issues going on. There's a lot of us out here who are, yes, it's going to be a difficult struggle in terms of finances, but we're going to make it through. Like, we're going to be able to make it through. And there's a lot of us that are not going to be able to. And so really focusing on what can we do to help those people who are struggling, because nothing happens in a vacuum. We are all in this together, and nothing is illuminated more in this current pandemic that we are really all in this together. Who would have thought? You would have seen, I live in Canada, the casino and church shut down in the same week, right? Those are two opposing opposite things that have come together and shut down, right? That, that people are asked to stay home, and that the world is in this giant pause. So how will we use that pause for self-reflection? How will you get on your mat and start to think about, what are some of the things I want to perhaps change in my life? What are some of the belief systems that I have has been indoctrinated into me that I can start to unpack because I have some time? So instead of me watching hours and hours and hours of Netflix, which is what I really want to do, how about I go on my bookshelf and get to that book that I've been meaning to read for the past year, but I haven't had time? And why don't I unpack some of the things that I'm learning in those books? How do I get to my mat and experience joyful movement? Because that's going to boost my immune system. It's going to boost my mood a little bit. It's going to help me manage all the things that are coming in. I've been meaning to be journaling for a while, and I bought these journals that are sitting on my shelf in a nice little box. It's time to crack open those journals and start writing down your thoughts. And for those of us who are listening to this, means that we have access to the internet. Maybe it's time to do that research project you've been meaning to do around, I really meant to read that book. I really meant to look up that article. I really meant to listen to that podcast. The universe has provided you that time now. So I'm not saying that you have to run out and do all these things, but I think now is a great time for self-reflection. What will I learn from this experience? How will I come out more resilient? How can I share my resources, my time, my energy, my privilege with others? This is a good time for me to start writing down what it is I can do when I come on the other side of this. And the other thing I want to remind everybody, when we come on the other side of this, there's going to be a huge campaign to go back to business as usual. So there's going to be some heavy marketing and investing in us forgetting this period in time, that this was a blip on the radar. And I don't believe that it was. These are difficult times. Lots of people are going to lose their lives. Lots of people are going to lose their loved ones. So let's not let that be in vain. Let's figure out what we can learn, and let's not forget this moment. Let's not get back into the grind of things and forget how we all had to come together for a moment for the betterment of all of mankind. And let's hold that in our hearts as part of our connection to each other, because we are forced to look at our humanity in this moment. And what can you change going forward? Because the old system wasn't working. And so this is a time for us to figure out how we want to come out of this, how we want to serve the greater good, how we want to look out for people who are less fortunate than ourselves, and how going forward that this pause isn't forgotten and just doesn't float into the ether as we are now going back to getting our hair and our nails done, or getting back into our cars and getting back to the mall, or whatever it is that's been our distraction this whole time. You've been given a break. So rest, take care of your body, do what you need to do to hold it together, but also start thinking critically about how you want to show up in the world for when we come to the other side of this. How do you want to use your life in a way that's beyond consumerism?
Yes, let's not forget this moment.
No.
And hold in our hearts how we want to step forward. I think that is such a powerful, powerful message. And I love to ask all of our guests, how do you like to define or think about the concept of being more connected?
Absolutely. If you can't do, as much as we're all in this self-isolation, I think we're more connected than ever. I've spoken to people I haven't spoken to in years because I've just been too busy
Yeah.
to talk. And now I've just been like, Wednesday, I have a call with my friend Rachel, who I haven't talked to all year. And I'm looking forward to that. And all the people that, you know, you just got too busy. And before you knew it, a year went by and you hadn't, you know, hadn't had an opportunity to hang out. Like, how are we going to make our lives more about relationship and less about stuff?
Yes. And I think that also ties in with the conversation that we were having about yoga earlier, that in a lot of ways it's become commodified. It's been about our external experience. It's been about exercise versus like the beautiful philosophy that you speak about with joyful movement.
Yep.
And how do we actually allow ourselves to come back into connecting to that place of internal radiance versus it just being about that external experience.
Exactly, about taking pictures for the gram.
And are there any other thoughts that you would like to share with our audience before we wrap?
Don't beat yourself up if you don't get a whole lot done during this the great pause, but just try to remember that it happened, because we will cycle back into regular life fairly quickly. And like I said, there'll be a massive marketing campaign to help us forget that this happened. And I don't want us to forget. I don't want us to forget the lessons that we have learned, that we need to have a better healthcare system that sees everybody and helps everybody, so that these kinds of pandemics don't continue happening because people don't have health care and they're afraid to go to the doctor because they're not going to be able to afford it. And they end up spreading the disease because they don't have access to resources. So it's time to look at how you can fix that. I'm in Canada, so it's slightly different, but in America, what can you guys start to do so that everybody has access to healthcare? Because that could have been a really great way to minimize this, or make this a lot less deadly for a lot of people. Like, what communities are disproportionately affected and why? And ask yourself if you want to continue to be a part of that, because you get to speak up with the power to vote. You guys have we'll see if this actually happens, but you guys have a pretty big presidential election coming up, and a lot of people sat out the last time. And so maybe it's time to start rethinking about what sitting out means, not only for you, because we are all in this together. That's what we learned in this pandemic, that we
1000%.
Not every single person is affected. So the same is true for when you don't want to show up for the political process. And a bunch of you are going to be like, oh, she got political. If you don't know me, apparently you don't know me, because I'm always but that politics to me is the vehicle for showing people we care about each other. Because if I show up and vote for healthcare, that means that my neighbor across the street who has the limited income is going to have the same access to healthcare that I do. And I think that's fair, right? If I show up and I vote, I decide what kinds of foods go in my grocery store, how education is equitable for all of us, so that we all move ahead. We've all heard the euphemism, the tide, lifts all ships. This is never more evident than at this moment.
Right now.
Now, that we are really all in this together. And just to go ahead and quote Martin Luther King, because everybody does, we might have all come in on different ships, but we are all in the same boat now. So it's time for us to start to look at each other, especially if you're in the spiritual community, running around saying namaste to everybody. Mean it when you say it. Mean it when you say it. Do you actually see the light in people who are less fortunate than you? Because if you do, you do something about it. You wouldn't just, your
actions would reflect that.
Yes, do your handstand and move on about your merry way. That's not what we're doing anymore. Too many things have happened. Too many things have shifted. Too many things are going to be forever different. And how do you now show up? There's always going to be life prior to COVID-19 and then life after COVID-19. This is a defining humanitarian moment. And what will you do with what you've learned in this moment?
Yes. this is such a defining transformational moment. And I love that you wrapped this up with this powerful call to action. And this audience is going to be made up of a lot of leaders and change makers. So I think bringing in the political piece is going to really resonate and hit home with folks. I think that that is something that we all need to be reminded of, and that we all need to continue to really soak in, that we have an important role to play in this. And how are we going to show up? And
For each other.
What actions are we going to take for the collective?
Yes, nothing happens in a vacuum. Nothing happens on its own. Nobody gets anywhere all by themselves. You are given an opportunity, people support you, and that's how you move forward. And you have to remember that when you're standing at the top of the heap, you didn't get there by yourself. Look back, because all those people helped you get up there. And what are you going to do to share the wealth with all those people?
Yes. Well, Dianne, I would love if you could also share a bit about your free gift that you are sharing with this audience.
Yes. So I'm sharing with you the Santosha Journal. So this is a self-reflective workbook. Not only does it asks you critical questions about how you want to show up. It's an exercise in self-study, which is what we've been talking about for most of this podcast. Plus it has little coloring. There's got a lot of mandalas in it for coloring, stress relief. But you can either do it one of two ways. You can print it out, and it can be a journal that you can, put pen to paper to and use, or you can use it electronically in a fillable PDF. And I believe if you're printing it, it's about 30 pages or so, but it's a day-by-day self-reflection about how you want to show up in the world. So that's what I'm offering.
Incredible. And how can our audience stay connected with you?
Well, I'm all over social media, the big ones anyway, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. I feel like I'm just too old for Snapchat. I don't quite get it. So I just leave that for my kids.
Very fair.
So I'm just like, wow, I don't know about that. So you can connect with me on Dianne, and there's two N's in Dianne and an E, Bondy, Bondy, yoga.com. You can also connect with me on yogaforeveryone.tv, which is part of my book, Yoga for Everyone. And that is an extension of the yoga practice for all shapes, all bodies, all sizes. There's over 500 videos on there to help people get started in their yoga practice. And if you just type me into the Google search engine, something will come up. So you can find me online.
Wonderful. And I just want to thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your powerful wisdom with our audience. I know that they're going to so benefit from this conversation, and also from your generous free gift. And so for our audience, I am so grateful for you tuning in, and hope that you will join us again tomorrow.
Thank you, Elise. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.